Warsaw slams German stance on Ukraine's NATO bid. Berlin, Paris, and other Western European capitals have always been against Kiev joining the bloc, the deputy foreign minister said. The ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine could have been avoided altogether if Germany hadn't tried to delay Kiev's membership of NATO, Polish Deputy Foreign Minister Piotr Warzyk has claimed. It's known that France, Germany, and countries in Western Europe, in general, have always been against Ukraine joining either the EU or NATO, Warzyk told Polskie Radio on Sunday. Recent comments by German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius were a sign that Berlin's opinion is unlikely to change, the diplomat insisted. Pistorius suggested on Thursday that this is not the time to decide about Ukraine's place in NATO. The bloc's members should consider this issue with a cool head and a hot heart. Not the other way around, he said. The question is, when will the time for those cool heads arrive? 5, 10, or 30 years after the war in Ukraine? Warzyk asked. If Germany had not tried to delay Ukraine's accession into NATO, if Ukraine had received an invitation to join the alliance many years ago in Munich, there wouldn't have been a war in Ukraine today, he claimed. Warsaw, which has been among Kiev's main backers in the EU during the conflict, is constantly trying to convince the Western partners to change their minds and for Ukraine to join the alliance as soon as possible, the deputy foreign minister said. In our opinion, the sooner this happens, the better, because it'll be a guarantee of security not only for Ukraine and Poland, but also for the entire region, he said. Russia, which considers NATO's eastward expansion a major security threat, had singled out the need to prevent Ukraine from joining the US-led bloc among the main reasons for its military operation in its neighboring country more than a year ago. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg claimed during his visit to Kiev last week that all NATO allies have agreed that Ukraine will become a member, but didn't specify when exactly it would happen. Kremlin Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov reacted to Stoltenberg's statement by saying NATO's continued line of absorbing and drawing Ukraine into the bloc was further proof that Moscow's decision to launch its military operation was the right one. Lavrov spearheads multilateralism and fairer world order in UN Security Council. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is due to chair UN Security Council meetings on April 24 to 25 as Russia's month-long presidency in the international body is about to wrap up. What can we expect from Lavrov's trip to the US, and how is Russia spearheading the idea of multipolarity amid the ongoing geopolitical shift? Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is expected to hold a high-level UN Security Council open debate on effective multilateralism through the defense of the principles of the UN Charter, one of the signature events of the Russian presidency, this April 24. Meanwhile, on April 25, Lavrov is due to chair a discussion on the Middle East, which will feature Tor Wensland, Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process. The meeting will focus on the stagnation of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict resolution and the escalation of tensions. Russia's effective multilateralism. The UN Security Council has repeatedly discussed the UN Charter and the multilateral system over the past few years. Most recently, such a debate, titled New Orientation for Reformed Multilateralism, took place on December 14, 2022, during India's Security Council presidency. Prior to that, China raised the matter on May 7, 2021, by organizing an open debate on upholding multilateralism and the uncentered international system. The ideas of multipolarity and a fairer world order, in contrast to the Western-centered model, were formulated by Moscow and Beijing on February 4, 2022. The joint Russo-Chinese statement emphasized that the world is going through momentous changes, including a transformation of the global governance architecture and world order. The document specifically criticized the actions of some actors representing but the minority on the international scale for making unilateral decisions to address international issues. Addressing the 77th session of the UN General Assembly on September 24, 2022, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov emphasized that the unipolar model of world development, which served the interests of the West, that has for centuries amassed the world's wealth at the expense of Asia, Africa and Latin America, is rapidly becoming the thing of the past. Later, in October 2022, Lavrov told the Russia 1 TV channel broadcaster that the reform of the UN Security Council, UNSC, is already overdue given the constant underrepresentation of developing countries. According to Lavrov, a whopping 7 representatives of the collective West participate in the 15-member UNSC meetings, while the countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America have been chronically underrepresented in the body for decades. Over the past 2 years, Russia has enhanced cooperation with the countries of the Global South amid the unfolding financial and food crisis. Prior to participating in the UNSC's signature events, Lavrov met with his Chinese counterpart Qin Gang in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, on April 13, 2023. While holding a presser after the meeting, Lavrov stated that Moscow supports Beijing's new Global Security Initiative and the Global Civilization Initiative, stands up for the UN Charter, upholds the principle of sovereign equality, advocates effective multilateralism, and is ready to make joint efforts to protect peace and stability in the region, as well as sustainable development. After that, Lavrov embarked on a high-profile 4-day, 4-country visit to South and Central America, visiting Brazil, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. The Russian foreign minister's diplomatic charm offensive resulted in a number of agreements in various areas of cooperation, but above all served to counterbalance U.S. policy and hegemony, according to international observers. Latin America is no longer the backyard of the United States, as Washington often tries to portray. The countries of the region have maintained closer ties with Russia and China regardless of the growing displeasure of the Monroe Doctrine proponents in the U.S. Furthermore, Brazil and Argentina have been openly discussing the establishment of a common currency for the region's southern common market, commonly known by Spanish abbreviation Mercosur. Simultaneously, Brazil, Russia, China and other participants of the BRICS Club are considering the introduction of a new currency for the bloc of developing nations and de-dollarization. Us ugly game with visas for Russian delegation. Neither of Lavrov's moves came unnoticed by the U.S., which launched an anti-Russia smear campaign since day one of Moscow's presidency in the UN Security Council in April. Washington's NATO allies in Europe as well as their subservient Kiev regime tried to cast doubt on Russia's sovereign right to chair the international body, but eventually had to reconcile themselves with the organization's rules. Still, in an apparent bid to poke Moscow, the U.S. resorted to processing delays in issuing visas for Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his associates for taking part in the April 24 to 25 UNSC events. Only on April 14, the U.S. started to issue visas for the Russian delegation. Yes, we were given visas, but, as always, this was done with a gross abuse of the position of the host country of the UN headquarters. They hesitated for a long time, then they issued visas, but not for the entire delegation. Some of our employees were not on the list, Lavrov said on April 19, during a joint presser with the Venezuelan foreign minister. However, Washington froze out Russian journalists who were supposed to cover the work of the nation's representatives in the UN Security Council. The U.S. did not provide any explanations for the move. Commenting on the U.S. decision not to provide visas to the Russian journalists, Lavrov noted on April 23 that the country that calls itself the most free one, got cold feet and ridiculed itself. I knew that the U.S. is famous for such things, but I was sure that everything would be different this time, the Russian foreign minister noted, calling Washington's behavior nothing short of ugly. We will not forget, we will not forgive, Lavrov added. Russia's agenda during UNSC presidency. Russia's Security Council program for April listed 3 open discussions. One of them already took place on April 10, being devoted to risks stemming from violations of the agreements regulating the export of weapons and military equipment. The Russian Federation seized the opportunity to raise the issue of the illicit and unregulated export of arms as Western members of the UN stepped up heavy weapons deliveries to Kiev. Izumi Nakamitsu, Undersecretary General and High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, pointed out that any transfers of arms and ammunition should include pre-transfer risk assessments and post-shipment controls, which include on-site inspections and end-user verifications. For his part, Vasily Nebenzia, the UN permanent representative of the Russian Federation, drew attention to the fact that the crisis in Ukraine has become a clear demonstration of Western countries' insincere and irresponsible behavior in arms control. In particular, he cited the fact that the United States and its allies had pressured third countries to step up arms supplies to Ukraine, in direct violation of fundamental international norms. He also drew attention to the loss of NATO arms in Ukraine. The alleged Pentagon leak shed light on U.S. attempts to force its allies and partners into ramping up arms supplies to Ukraine. Meanwhile, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh revealed earlier this week in an interview with Russian media that the West is well aware that weapons they deliver to Ukraine are being sold on the black market, something mainstream media has tried to hush up. All in all, Russia's presidency was mostly devoted to the issues pertaining to the Global South. The UNSC's April schedule included briefings on the work of the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, MINUSMA, as well as the UN's mission in Colombia. A series of other briefings in April focused on Yemen, the deteriorating security situation in Africa's Great Lakes region, United Nations support mission in Libya, UNSMIL, United Nations mission in Kosovo, UNMIK, and the United Nations Integrated Office in Haiti, BINA. Who will Lavrov meet with on UNSC sidelines? Sergei Lavrov invited the heads of foreign affairs departments, the State Department and others to take part in the meetings at which he will chair on April 24 to 25. It is still unclear whether the Russian foreign minister will meet with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The two briefly met each other on the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers meeting in New Delhi as tensions between Moscow and Washington ran high. On Sunday, the Russian Foreign Ministry made it clear that there are no plans for a meeting between Lavrov and Blinken at the UN headquarters in New York City. By and large, we do not have an agenda with the Americans for discussion at the ministerial level at the moment, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov told reporters on April 23. Previously, Russia's permanent representative to the UN Nebenzia did not rule out that the two may meet on the sidelines of the UN Security Council's events. Furthermore, when asked on April 7 whether he plans to meet with Blinken during his trip to New York, Lavrov remarked that Russia never refuses serious proposals for negotiations. 5 days earlier, the Russian Foreign Ministry told Sputnik that Blinken made a phone call to Lavrov but provided no further details. Washington appears to be concerned by both Russia's growing activity in the Global South and accelerated rapprochement between Russia and China, following the Biden administration's provocative moves against the two global players. It was earlier reported that the Biden administration is seeking to resume dialogue with the Chinese leadership after it canceled Antony Blinken's visit to the People's Republic over the spy balloon scandal. According to Western press, Beijing is currently giving U.S. top officials the cold shoulder by avoiding high-level engagement. Meanwhile, Nebenzia revealed Lavrov will most likely hold a meeting with UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres in New York on April 24. We know for certain that the Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov will meet with UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres on Monday, armed with a lot of questions and topics for discussion that have piled up, Nebenzia told a Russian broadcaster last week. 6 killed, 20 injured in road accident in southern Pakistan. At least 6 passengers died and 20 others sustained injuries after a speeding bus fell down from a highway near Jamshoro district of Pakistan's southern Sindh province, local media reported on Monday. Taiwan sets female reservists military training timeline, media. Taipei had previously indicated it did not have the resources to prepare women veterans for possible combat. Taiwan's military is to begin preparing a group of female military veterans to undergo 5 to 7 days of reservist training next month, the CNA news agency reported on Monday, citing anonymous sources within Taipei's armed forces. Taipei's Ministry of National Defense, MND, said in January that it was to change its policy of training only male reservists but has made no indication as to whether this was due to an increased risk of conflict with Beijing. It did say, however, that all reservists should have similar levels of experience regardless of gender, according to CNA. A group of female reservists will be deployed to an undisclosed location in Yeyuan's Bay district on May 8, CNA said, where they will be given training for 5 to 7 days. The type of training will be dependent on their military rank upon discharge from the armed forces. A total of 220 female reservists will be asked to undergo training this year, the MND indicated. Women in Taiwan are not required to take part in military conscription and compulsory reservist training similar to their male counterparts, but they are eligible to join Taipei's army voluntarily to serve as officers or soldiers. The MND had previously stated that it did not have the necessary infrastructure and facilities to accommodate the training of both male and female reservists. However, CNA reports that this had been a point of contention within the ranks of some reservists who saw it as a form of gender discrimination. In 2021, Taiwan had 8,915 female reservists within its ranks. Around 15% of Taipei's 180,000 active armed forces are women. The MND did not specify if or when around 8,700 other reservists might be required to undergo training. Taipei's boosting of its armed ranks comes amid increased tensions with Beijing in and around the Taiwan Strait. Beijing says that there is only one China and views the island as a breakaway province which remains part of its sovereign territory, while Taiwan maintains that it has the right to self-governance. Ukraine conflict, day 425. EU set to finalize Ukraine ammunition deal. Top headlines. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell expressed confidence on Monday that the bloc would finalize a plan within days to buy ammunition for Ukraine after Kiev expressed frustration at wrangling among EU member states. Read more below. Russia said on Saturday it was expelling more than 20 German diplomats in a tit-for-tat move. The Group of Seven, G7, economic powers called on Sunday for the extension, full implementation, and expansion of the grain deal that enables vital exports of food from Ukraine. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev said on Sunday that if the G7 moved to ban exports to Russia, it would respond by terminating the grain deal, which it has already signaled it will not allow to continue beyond May 18. Global military spending rose to a record last year as the Russia-Ukraine conflict drove the biggest annual increase in expenditure in Europe since the end of the Cold War 3 decades ago, a prominent conflict and armaments think tank said on Monday. Turkey's defense minister said he planned to meet his Syrian, Russian, and Iranian counterparts in Moscow on Tuesday, amid efforts to rebuild Ankara-Damascus ties after years of animosity during the Syrian war. In depth. EU close to agreement over ammunition for Ukraine. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell expressed confidence on Monday that the bloc would finalize a plan within days to buy ammunition for Ukraine after Kiev expressed frustration at wrangling among EU member states. Yes, there is still some disagreement. But I am sure everybody will understand that we are in a situation of extreme urgency, Borrell told reporters as he arrived for a meeting of EU foreign ministers in Luxembourg. I am sure that in the following days we will reach an agreement, he said. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba expressed frustration in a tweet last week that the landmark deal for EU countries to jointly buy artillery shells for Kiev has not yet been implemented due to disagreements over how much of the business has to stay within Europe. For Ukraine, the cost of inaction is measured in human lives, he warned on Thursday. Kuleba was expected to make his case directly to EU foreign ministers at Monday's meeting, addressing them by video link on the state of the war triggered by Russia's invasion last year. Artillery rounds, particularly 155mm shells, have become critical to the conflict as Ukrainian and Russian forces wage an intense war of attrition. Officials say Kiev is burning through more rounds than its allies can currently produce. The joint procurement plan is part of a multi-track EU deal to get 1 million artillery shells or missiles to Ukraine within 12 months and ramp up European munitions production, approved by foreign ministers last month. The first element is the most immediate. It sets aside €1 billion, $1.1 billion, to reimburse EU governments for sending munitions to Ukraine from existing stocks. Borrell stressed that the track was up and running. He said EU countries had already requested reimbursements for ammunition worth €600 million, $660 million. But the second track, worth another €1 billion, $1.1 billion, to fund joint procurement, has yet to be finalized. EU officials have said they hope to sign the first contracts with arms firms at the end of next month. Palestinians to be allowed to enter Israel for joint memorial ceremony. Israel's High Court of Justice has ordered Defense Minister Yoav Gallant to allow Palestinians invited to the annual memorial ceremony to enter the country to attend the event, Israeli media reported. The court said, as quoted by the newspaper on Sunday, that it regrets Gallant's decision made earlier this month to block the Palestinians from entering Israel for the ceremony. According to reports, some 150 Palestinians invited to the annual joint ceremony, which is meant to bring together Israelis and Palestinians who have lost loved ones in the conflict, are set to enter Israel for the Monday event. In 2018 and 2019, Israel's High Court of Justice also ordered the defense ministers at the time to allow Palestinians to enter Israel for the memorial ceremony. Mexico's president contracts COVID-19. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador says he has contracted the coronavirus for the third time and will cancel personal meetings for the next several days. "You won't believe this, friends, I tested positive for COVID-19. It's not serious. I had to suspend the tour. I am in Mexico City. I'll spare myself for a few days." Secretary of the Interior Adán Augusto López Hernández will lead the morning sessions. "See you soon," López Obrador said on Twitter on Sunday night. Earlier, the administration of the Mexican leader announced the president's tour in the state of Yucatan was being suspended. López Obrador first contracted COVID-19 in January 2021 and reportedly underwent treatment for 2 weeks. The second time that the Mexican president contracted the coronavirus was a year later, but he cancelled his public appearances only for 4 days then. NAACP sues Mississippi over separate and unequal policing. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, in the U.S. warns that separate and unequal policing will return to Mississippi's majority black capital under a state-run police department, and the civil rights organization is suing the governor and other officials over it. The Associated Press has reported. Mississippi's governor signed a bill on Friday to expand the territory of a state-run police department inside the majority black capital city of Jackson, where about 83% of its residents are black, the largest percentage of any major U.S. city, according to the report. The NAACP said in its lawsuit filed late on Friday, that these are serious violations of the principle of self-government because they take control of the police and some courts out of the hands of residents. In certain areas of Jackson, a citizen can be arrested by a police department led by a state-appointed official, be charged by a state-appointed prosecutor, be tried before a state-appointed judge, and be sentenced to imprisonment in a state penitentiary regardless of the severity of the act. The lawsuit said. NAACP National President Derek Johnson, who lives in Jackson, said the law would treat black people as second-class citizens. "They're only imposing this on the city of Jackson," Johnson said. "No other jurisdiction in the state of Mississippi will have this type of oversight and taking of local authority. That is a direct violation of equal protection." The legislation was passed by a majority white state House and Senate. EU lawmakers urge France to expel Chinese ambassador. Last week, Liu He questioned the legal basis for the sovereignty of former Soviet republics, drawing widespread criticism. Dozens of MPs representing a number of European countries have called on France to boot out China's ambassador to the country, Liu He. Last week, the senior diplomat questioned whether former Soviet republics can today be regarded as sovereign within the current framework of international law, a comment that landed him in hot water with several EU member states. An open letter to French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna and published by newspaper Le Monde on Sunday listed 80 lawmakers as signatories. In it, they urged Paris to declare Ambassador Liu She persona non grata immediately as a response to his completely unacceptable behavior. Liu is no stranger to controversy, having made a reputation for himself during his 4 years in office as an embodiment of China's assertive foreign policy, commonly known as wolf warrior diplomacy. Liu's comment violates international law and constitutes a threat against the security of European partner countries of France, the authors insist. The MPs also accused the outspoken Chinese diplomat of having made inflammatory remarks in the past. They cited the comments he made last August about the Taiwanese people needing to be re-educated after China regains control over the self-governing island. On Saturday, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania lodged a joint protest over Liu's latest comment, made to a French TV channel. The 3 Baltic nations summoned their Chinese charges d'affaires to provide explanations. In a statement on Sunday, the French Foreign Ministry emphasized its solidarity with NATO's Eastern European allies and called on China to clarify its position on the issue. Top EU diplomat Josep Borrell, in turn, described the remarks made by Beijing's envoy in Paris as unacceptable. The controversial interview featured Ambassador Liu claiming that countries of the former Soviet Union don't have effective status in international law because there is no international agreement to make their status as a sovereign country concrete. He also offered the opinion that Crimea had originally been Russian and had been gifted to Ukraine by Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev in the mid-1950s. Meanwhile, the Chinese embassy in France deleted a transcript of Liu's interview from its official account on the WeChat social media platform, just hours after having posted it early on Monday. Speaking to the press on Monday, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning reiterated that Beijing respects the sovereign state status of the participating republics after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. She also stressed that China was among the first countries to establish diplomatic relations with the new states. U.S. government annoyed by Macron's Ukraine push, Bloomberg. The French leader's initiative on peace negotiations hasn't gone down well in Washington, sources told the agency. The White House is annoyed by French President Emmanuel Macron's unilateral attempt to initiate diplomatic negotiations on the Russia-Ukraine conflict with mediation by China, sources have told Bloomberg. According to people familiar with the U.S. government's thinking on the issue, the recent move by the French leader hasn't gone down well in Washington, the agency reported on Sunday. The sources claimed that the White House was annoyed by what they see as Macron freelancing on a delicate diplomatic issue without consulting with allies. The people quoted by Bloomberg also said they did not believe the French president's initiative would be successful, pointing out that he had proposed other peace plans during the conflict, but later backtracked on them. They claimed it was clear that Beijing had no intention of using its influence on Moscow regarding the situation in Ukraine, the report said. Last week, Bloomberg cited anonymous sources as saying France has been looking to revive peace talks between Russia and Ukraine by this summer with Chinese help. Macron was claimed to have asked his foreign policy advisor, Emmanuel Bon, to work directly with Wang Yi, the top Chinese official in charge of foreign relations, on formulating a roadmap for settling the crisis. During his visit to Beijing earlier in April, Macron urged his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping to use his influence to make Russia come to its senses regarding Ukraine. However, according to media reports, he failed to persuade China to align its policy on the conflict with the Western one. Beijing has been saying for months that peace talks are needed in Ukraine, while stressing that any settlement should respect the interests of all parties. Chinese officials have also blamed the outbreak of the conflict on the actions of the U.S. and its allies, including NATO's eastward expansion. Following his trip to Beijing, Macron tried to distance Paris from Washington's aggressive line on China, saying the Europeans can't resolve the crisis in Ukraine, so they mustn't allow themselves to be dragged into the confrontation between the US and China over Taiwan. Europe should look for strategic autonomy, he insisted. Macron's efforts to improve relations with China and get involved in the peace process in Ukraine have been criticized by other EU nations as premature and jeopardizing the bloc's unity. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, who also visited China, has fully backed the U.S. stance on Taiwan. Her Polish counterpart Mateusz Morawiecki said that the EU will be shooting into our own knee if it tries looking for strategic autonomy because it will only make the bloc dependent on Beijing. UK, US, and EU impose new sanctions on Iran. The British government said in a statement on Monday that the UK, US, and EU are announcing further sanctions on Iranian officials, including those from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. The latest UK sanctions targeted 4 regional commanders of the IRGC, the statement added. Sweden, as the presidency of the Council of the EU, confirmed that the Foreign Affairs Council has adopted the 7th package of sanctions against individuals and entities from Iran. Poland conducts drills against backdrop of anti-German sentiment. Poland has conducted military exercises suggesting a mock enemy from the west, during which the capture of the port city of Szczecin was prevented, against the backdrop of anti-German sentiment, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, SVR, said on Monday. The General Staff of the Polish Armed Forces organized the military exercise to practice actions in the event of a military attack from the west at the end of March of this year. An offensive is being prepared to capture the city of Szczecin and its seaport, as well as the Szczecin-Goleniów airport, the SVR said in a statement. According to the SVR data, the mock enemy is located to the west of Poland and relies on the national diaspora living in the West Pomeranian voivodeship. It refers to ethnic Germans who carry out military aggression. The exercises, focused on tackling a hypothetical threat from the west, have been taking place amid growing anti-German sentiment in Warsaw and Poland's increasing suspicion towards its western neighbor, which is reflected in the Polish military planning, the SVR added. There is growing anti-German sentiment in Warsaw, as well as concerns about possible revanchist claims of Berlin in regard to the former German territories, which became a part of Poland after World War II. Suspicion towards Germany is already being reflected in the Polish military planning, the statement said. Moreover, the idea of geopolitical change, including the redrawing of boundaries, is becoming increasingly acute for the Polish government in the context of the Ukraine crisis, according to the SVR data. Le Pen could take power in France, Macron. The right-wing politician may win the next presidential election, the French president warns. Le Pen could take power in France, Macron. French centrists will likely lose to right-wing politicians, namely Marine Le Pen, in the 2027 presidential election if current challenges are left unaddressed, President Emmanuel Macron has warned. Speaking to Le Parisien newspaper in an interview published on Sunday, Macron said Le Pen is set to become the biggest political winner of the ongoing turmoil in the country. Marine Le Pen will arrive in power if we are unable to respond to the challenges of the country and if we introduce a habit of lying or denying reality, the president warned. Given that the main tool of Le Pen and her like is populism, he continued, it is impossible for centrists to compete with right-wingers in the field of making promises. Instead, they should win back the voters through real action, tackling the challenges of reindustrialization, ecology and the fight for our public services, Macron said. Macron also stood by his highly divisive pension reform, reiterating his stance that the only real mistake about it was not advertising the unpopular move to the public enough. Macron is bunkered, Le Pen read more, Macron is bunkered, Le Pen. Perhaps the mistake was not being sufficiently present to give substance to the reform and carry it myself, Macron said. The pension reform, which included raising France's retirement age to 64 from 62, sparked mass protests and civil unrest, which continue across the country. Macron's decision to push through the extremely unpopular measure without a full legislative procedure has aggravated the tensions even more. Le Pen, who has unsuccessfully run for president 3 times, losing her 2 latest bids to Macron, has accused the president of creating a total rupture between the French public and the presidency. Speaking to BFM TV on Saturday, she said Macron has ended up completely bunkered with his reform. He can no longer leave the Élysée presidential palace without arousing the ire of a people he refuses to listen to and whose will he refuses to respect, she said, adding that Macron was the one at the origin of the disorder, the chaos that engulfs the nation. Multiple recent polls have suggested that Le Pen has already overtaken Macron in public popularity in the wake of the turmoil. For instance, a survey conducted for BFM TV by the Alebe Group early in April showed Le Pen would score 55% and Macron 45% if pitted against each other in a runoff vote at the time. However, in last year's election, Macron defeated Le Pen by a comfortable margin of some 17%. Australia unveils new strategic defence review to become more self-reliant. The review document stipulates that the Australian Defence Force should prioritise an array of areas, including development of a nuclear-powered submarine fleet and longer-range strike capability. The Australian government has released the public version of the country's new Defence Strategic Review, DSR, which Canberra claims sets the agenda for ambitious, but necessary, reform to the military's posture and structure. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese touted the review as the most significant work that's been done since the Second World War. It demonstrates a world where challenges to our national security are always evolving. We cannot fall back on old assumptions. We must build the strength in our security by seeking to shape the future rather than waiting for the future to shape us, he told reporters. According to him, the implementation of the DSR will help Australia become more self-reliant, more prepared and more secure in the years ahead. The document outlined at least 6 priority areas for immediate action, including the development of Australia's nuclear-powered submarine capability and longer-range strike capacity, speeding up the integration of new technologies into the military, defence workforce retention and recruitment, plus improving strategic cooperation between Canberra and its key partners in the Indo-Pacific. The review called for a rapid transformation of the Australian Defence Force, ADF, which will gain the ability to strike targets more than 500 kilometres away, up from the current 40 kilometres range. In addition to defending Australia and the immediate region, the ADF will be required to deter through denial any adversary's attempt to project power against Australia through our northern approaches, according to the DSR. Separately, the review claimed that the US was no longer the unipolar leader of the Indo-Pacific, adding that intense competition between the US and China was defining the region and that major power competition brought potential for conflict. In this vein, the DSR warned that Australia should avoid the highest level of strategic risk we now face as a nation, the prospect of major conflict in the region. On the other hand, the review pointed out that Australia would work more closely with the US, including increased bilateral military planning and hosting more rotations of American forces, including submarines. Since the establishment of AUKUS a couple of years ago, Russia has repeatedly warned of joint efforts by the US and its regional allies, including Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, to militarize the Asia-Pacific. According to Moscow, NATO had stopped talking about its defensive nature as the alliance focuses, in particular, on expanding its clout in the region. Australia, the US and the UK announced the AUKUS defense partnership in September 2021. The first initiative announced under the pact was the development of nuclear-powered submarine technology for the Royal Australian Navy, which prompted the Australian government to abandon a $66 billion agreement with France's naval group company on the construction of diesel-electric submarines. Beijing has likewise repeatedly been critical of the AUKUS deal, slamming it as a breach of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Protesters seek justice for 269 victims of 2019 Easter Sunday attacks. Thousands gathered in the Sri Lankan capital of Colombo on Friday to take part in a silent protest demanding justice for the 269 people killed in the 2019 Easter Sunday bombings in the country that also left another 500 people injured. The demonstration included local religious orders, who showed up in support of those killed in 3 of the churches attacked. 2 of the churches were Catholic and 1 was Protestant. A total of 42 foreigners were among the 269 killed. Most died in separate attacks on 3 tourist hotels on Easter Sunday. The protesters marched to demand the government take more adequate measures to uncover and punish those responsible, including the mastermind behind the shocking coordinated suicide bombings. No one has yet been held responsible for the shocking attacks. Many blame the former Sri Lankan President Maithripala Sirisena and then Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe for failing to act and letting poor political communication get in the way of justice for those killed. Indian dependence on Russian oil soaring, Nikkei. New Delhi is snapping up shipments banned in the EU. Russian oil supplies now account for 30% of total imports to India, the world's 3rd biggest crude consumer, Nikkei reported on Sunday, citing analysis of shipping data for March. New Delhi previously relied on Middle Eastern oil but purchased over 6 million tons of crude from Russia in March, according to data tracked by UK-based researcher Refinitiv and shared by Nikkei. The number reflects the tracked amount of crude oil, fuel oil, and refined petroleum products transported by tankers from Russian ports to India by the end of last month. The reported 30% dependence on Russian oil, which is expected to increase to up to 50% this month, marked a new high in trade relations between New Delhi and Moscow. In January 2022, Russia accounted for just 2% of Indian oil imports. Meanwhile, China purchased over 4.7 million tons of oil from Russia in March, second only to India. Dependence on Russia by the world's 2nd biggest oil consumer reached 10%, Nikkei reported. According to the media agency, Russia's flagship Urals blend is currently hovering in the $62 range, which is up to 30% lower compared to the price of the North Sea Brent international benchmark. Prior to sanctions, Russian crude was sold at a slight discount to Brent. India and China have dramatically increased imports of Russian crude offered at a discount since Western states shunned direct supplies in response to Moscow's military operation in Ukraine. In December, the EU, G7, and their allies introduced a collective ban on Russian seaborne oil exports, along with a price cap of $60 per barrel. Another embargo banning almost all imports of Russian oil products, as well as introducing price caps on diesel and other petroleum products, kicked in on February 5. Russia has opposed any attempts to cap the price of its energy exports and has banned any oil deals under the scheme. In February, Russia announced plans to voluntarily reduce oil production in March by 500,000 barrels per day as it halts sales to buyers that comply with Western-imposed restrictions. Trading calendar of Shanghai Shenzhen Hong Kong Stock Connect optimized from April 24. Enhancements to the trading calendars of Shanghai Shenzhen Hong Kong Stock Connect take effect on Monday, which will deepen the cross-border market accessibility of the Stock Connect programs and bring more trading opportunities to investors. According to an announcement from Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited, HKEX, the China Securities Regulatory Commission, CSRC, and Hong Kong's Securities and Futures Commission, SFC, approved adjustments to the trading calendar for both Shanghai and Shenzhen Stock Connect, allowing Stock Connect trading on all trading days in both markets, including on those which are now closed because clearing services are unavailable. By allowing Stock Connect investors to trade on all days which both markets are open, investors will be able to better manage their risks for trading under Stock Connect. It will also deepen cross-border market accessibility of the Stock Connect programs, enabling Hong Kong investors to enjoy wider access to Chinese mainland markets while simultaneously providing Chinese mainland investors with more opportunities to engage with Hong Kong markets, according to HKEX. The enhancements will add up to over 10 trading days to northbound and southbound trading each year and will enable trading under Stock Connect on all trading days that are mutual to the Hong Kong and mainland markets, HKEX further explained. The SFC said in a press release that the adjustments address the misalignment between Stock Connect holidays. The SFC will work closely with the CSRC and other Chinese mainland counterparts to further develop and enhance Stock Connect as well as other mutual market access schemes. After the implementation of the enhancements, the first additional trading days of Hong Kong Stock Connect will be April 27 and April 28, and the first additional trading day of Shanghai and Shenzhen Stock Connect will be May 25, according to the CSRC. China's big refiners snapping up Russian oil, Reuters. Major processing plants are reportedly squeezing out smaller players for supplies from the sanctioned country. China's largest state-owned and private refineries are buying more Russian crude, driving up its price, and forcing smaller independent producers, known as teapots, to search for cheaper options, Reuters reported this week. Top Chinese buyers, which shunned Russian oil when the EU and G7 imposed an embargo and a price cap on the commodity in December, have restored confidence since then and joined the race for discounted oil. In February, state refiners PetroChina and Sinopec resumed imports, and in March, large private oil refiners Hengli Petrochemical and Jiangsu Eastern Shenghongco followed suit, according to traders and ship tracking data from Refinitiv, Kepler, and Vortexa. In March, China's overall Russian crude imports, including pipeline deliveries and seaborne supplies, surged to a record 9.61 million tons, which is the equivalent to 2.26 million barrels per day, BPD, customs data showed on Friday. China's imports of Russian Urals are on track to break March's record in April as more refiners start to tap on the discounted crude from Russia's Baltics, said Vortexa analyst Emily, adding that around 700,000 BPD of Urals may reach China in April, up from 600,000 BPD in the previous month. Meanwhile, smaller refiners had to opt for alternatives such as Russian Arctic grades, Iranian and Venezuelan oil as the big buyers are back on the market. In March alone, a record 4.2 million barrels of Verde blend from the Russian Arctic were delivered to China's Shandong province, home to most of the teapots, Kepler data showed. Loadings of crude from Russia's western ports in April is expected to reach the highest level since 2019, above 2.4 million barrels per day, BPD, despite Moscow's pledge to cut oil production, trading and shipping sources said. At the same time, discounts that Russia was offering as it sought to divert supplies away from the West are narrowing. Discounts for the country's flagship Urals blend contracted in China for July have reduced to about $9 to $10 a barrel to ICE Brent futures on a delivered ex-ship basis, from around $14 a barrel for March deliveries, according to Reuters. Indonesia ready to bypass Visa and MasterCard, media. Asia's fourth biggest economy is scheduled to launch its own payment system next month, according to RIA Novosti. The Bank of Indonesia will launch its domestic card payment system in May as part of a strategy to reduce dependency on foreign systems and protect transactions from geopolitical fallout, RIA Novosti news agency reported on Monday. Central Bank Governor Perry Warjio reportedly said the country is officially launching physical domestic cards in close cooperation with the government and the Indonesian Credit Card Association, AKKI. In March, the regulator announced it was preparing to phase out Visa and MasterCard as it seeks more autonomy over its payment infrastructure by minimizing the role of foreign payment providers. Indonesian President Joko Widodo earlier urged regional authorities to wean themselves off foreign payment systems and start using cards issued by local banks. He argued that Indonesia needed to shield itself from geopolitical disruptions, citing Western sanctions targeting Russia's financial sector over the conflict in Ukraine. We must remember the sanctions imposed by the US on Russia. Visa and MasterCard could be a problem, he warned. Indonesian Credit Card Association's board member Dodit Proboyakti recently told RIA Novosti that Jakarta would apply Russia's experience with its MIR payment system to promote the domestic financial network. Moscow rolled out its own national card system, MIR, soon after the US first targeted the country with sanctions in 2014, and created the Domestic National Payment Card System, NSPK, to take over all Visa and MasterCard transactions should the US-based companies pull the plug. CNSA, China presented Russia, France with lunar samples. China has presented Russia and France with lunar samples, China National Space Administration, CNSA, revealed at a launching ceremony for this year's Space Day of China on Monday. During French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to China this April, China presented France with 1.5 grams of lunar samples for scientific research. For the same purpose, on February 4, 2022, China presented Russia with 1.5 grams of lunar samples when Russian President Vladimir Putin visited China, and Russia reciprocated China with 1.5 grams of lunar samples during Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Russia in March 2023. The lunar samples China delivered to France and Russia originate from the drilled samples and surface samples returned by its Chang'e 5 mission in December 2020 from the Statio Tianquan in the northeastern Oceanus Procellarum on the near side of the Moon. The lunar samples Russia gave to China originate from the drilled samples by the former Soviet Union's Luna 16 mission in 1970. A regulation on the management of lunar samples was released by CNSA in December 2020 to encourage international research and sharing of scientific achievements on lunar samples. Scientists from Australia, Russia, France, the United States, the United Kingdom and Sweden have participated in scientific research on Chinese lunar samples. The international sharing and joint research on lunar samples is a major event in the scientific community worldwide, an important approach to study the formation and evolution of the Moon, as well as a key scientific activity for human society to explore the unknowns, said CNSA. Under the principles of peaceful utilization, equality, and mutual benefit, China conducts space exchanges and cooperation with other countries to jointly build a community of shared future for mankind in outer space, CNSA added.